Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining today's session on modernizing clinical desktops and applications. My name is Tisa Murdoch, and I'm part of the end-user computing group here at VMware. And I also have with me my colleague, Mehul Patel. Mehul is also from the desktop product group at VMware. And I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists today. We have three customers with us. Starting from left to right, we have Joshua Spencer from the University of Toledo. We have Mark West from Spectrum Health, and we have Joseph Wolfgram from Overlake Hospital Medical Center. So welcome, and thank you very much for joining today. So for today's session, I'd like to do a brief introduction on what we found out in the last 2 years. We've spent a lot of time talking with customers and partners, trying to identify the specific healthcare challenges, which helps us build a better product, a better solution. So I'd like to share with you what we found. I'll then turn the presentation over to Mehul. Mehul is going to give you a briefing and an update on what's new in VMware View 4.5. We recently announced this product. Actually, this morning, the press release went out. And then I want to spend the majority of the time talking with our panelists, and they're going to share with you where they are in their virtualization journey. They're each using either desktop virtualization, application virtualization, or a combination of the two. And then I definitely want to leave about 15 minutes at the end open for some Q&A, because I know that's always top of mind for people in the healthcare industry. They want to hear from other customers, hear what they're doing, and learn from their experiences. So with that, let's just go ahead and get started. We're going to say some forward-looking statements. But one thing that we've noticed in the healthcare industry is that the desktop's really changing, and the way that people view the desktop is changing. You know, the idea of starting with a physical device, installing an operating system, layering applications on top of that operating system, and then allowing end users to save data and information to that physical device is simply too hard to manage, it's too expensive, and there's just no way to secure that. So it also presents a lot of limitations for IT. It limits their ability to provide a high level of service to the end user, and it really limits their ability to respond to quickly changing business needs and requirements. And then combined with the fact that end users aren't willing to be tethered to a physical device anymore. They have all these different devices that they want to use to get information and get access to their applications. You know, one thing that's really top of mind for all of us in the healthcare industry is how are we going to roll out electronic medical records and get started on the way to meaningful use so we can qualify for stimulus funds. And what we're finding is that as people go through this process and roll out their EMR systems, they're also investing in a lot more workstations, a lot more devices to access this information. So we're going to have to figure out a way to manage these devices. And it's really expensive to manage a PC. We've done a lot of work in this area because we know this has been top of mind for people. And a lot of times they have a hard time quantifying those soft expenses, those operating expenses. So we commissioned IDC to do some homework for us. We went out and interviewed 15 customers, 5 of which were healthcare accounts. And what we found out is that for every dollar it takes to acquire a PC, it takes about $3 a year to manage that PC. And those are costs that are downtime for planned or unplanned downtime, help desk calls, upgrading applications, upgrading the operating system. So then that really starts people rethinking how they're going to deliver desktops and applications moving forward. This is a prime time to rethink how you're delivering desktops into a clinical environment. And you have to ask yourself, is the way that we're doing it today, is that meeting the needs of both the end user as well as IT? And if we look at the use case for clinical desktops, the needs and requirements really differ between the end user of the technology and the manager of the technology, the IT department. So, for example, the end user, they simply want immediate access to their applications and their data. They're very mobile. They want their session to roam with them as they move from floor to floor and room to room. They want it easy to use. They don't have time to be retrained on a new solution. They want a very highly available and resilient desktop. And many times physicians have a need for remote access. And then if you look at the other side of the house at IT, they simply want to be able to cost effectively and efficiently manage all their desktops and their applications. They have to maintain the security without inhibiting the productivity of the clinicians. They need to be able to do more with less. Nobody has more budget today, and healthcare is no exception. They also need to be able to make EMR services easy to use so that physicians can start using the CPOE system and they can start on their way to meaningful use to qualify for stimulus funds. So if we look at the existing clinical desktop, it's pretty cumbersome for both the end user of the solution as well as IT. Many times you have applications that are being delivered over the network using either Citrix or terminal services. You have some applications that are installed on that local device, and you have some applications, many times web-based applications, that have their own terminal or their own PC because they simply can't coexist on a desktop with other applications due to Java incompatibilities or .NET or what have you. So as a result, the end user, the clinician, has to find the right terminal, log in, enter multiple passwords, launch the application just to get to the point where they can start entering information or start charting a patient. It's also a very cumbersome workflow for IT because they're managing these large siloed Citrix infrastructure on the back end in addition to all these physical devices throughout the hospital facility within the hospital walls itself. And many times it's so cumbersome that the clinicians go back to using pen and paper and entering everything in the back at the end of the day, which isn't doing anybody any good. So we can use virtualization to start solving some of these challenges. And using virtualization, we can start breaking down the different components of the desktop. We can separate the operating system from the underlying device. We can separate the applications from the operating system. And we can further separate out the user data and settings, which we call user persona, and keep them persistent. We can then move these different desktop components into the data center or into the cloud, where we can manage them independently of each other. And this provides a tremendous amount of agility for IT, because now they can upgrade the operating system without worrying about the applications. They can update applications without worrying about the underlying operating system, all while keeping that user data and settings persistent. Then when an end user goes to access their virtual desktop, VMware View will dynamically assemble this desktop together to present that end user with a single, unified, and personalized view of their desktop, all their applications readily available to them. And this is And this is able to meet the needs of both the end user as well as IT. Because now the desktop's always up and running in the data center for the end user. They can go to any terminal throughout the healthcare facility, log in, and get immediate access to those applications and start working. It's a very highly available scenario. We're able to leverage the vSphere platform and apply all of those great enterprise features now to the desktop. They're also able to get it on multiple devices because now they're getting their they're getting their desktop in a cloud model and available to basically any device that they want to use. And it's also able to meet the requirements for IT because now you're able to centralize the management of your desktops and applications. You're able to automate a lot of those business processes around managing the desktop. You no longer have to be close to a desktop to provision it, and as a result, you're able to reduce your costs. And one of the biggest benefits for this model is that you're finally able to get all of that data and information off of that endpoint device that's susceptible to theft or loss, bring that back into the data center where you can secure it, protect it, and manage the access to it. And this is really important because what we're doing is we're helping customers to continue to build out that internal private cloud. Most of our customers have already started with server virtualization in the data center, and they can now add desktops and applications along with virtualizing servers, storage, and networking, and they can build out this internal private cloud, manage it all on a common platform using vSphere, and start to deliver IT as a service from the data center. So a lot of times people ask us, this sounds a little bit complex. How do I get started? And we're going to hear from our panelists, and they each are in different levels of the desktop and application virtualization journey, so I think that's going to be really interesting. But we found some commonality. Among that being, it's a really good idea to do an assessment of your environment. We have several tools that are available for you to use, and you need to figure out which applications are right for application virtualization, which user groups are right to virtualize at what stage you are in your journey. At that point, a lot of people decide to go with application virtualization. This is an easy first step because it doesn't require any additional infrastructure. You can centralize your application, you can ThinApp it, and then deliver that into a physical PC, into your Citrix server farm, or eventually to a virtual desktop. And this is really where you want to be because this is where you're going to reap the most benefits by being able to bring that all back into the data center where you can manage it as a central service. Now with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mehul, and he's going to brief you on what's new with VMware 4.5.
Thanks, Tisa. So there's a full-hour session on what's new with VMware View 4.5, and I'm going to spare you from that. In fact, what I'm going to do is just highlight on a couple of areas that are specifically important and relevant to healthcare. Before I get into those specific areas, how many of you are familiar with VMware View in general? How many of you deployed or tried it? Oh, you're done, almost all of you. So as you know, what we've got here in the middle is the data center where desktops are hosted. In the lower left is where you see the clients where end users will access the virtual desktops in the data center. In the far right, you see the View Composer, our image management solution that allows you to share master image across many users, enhancing both image management as well as storage efficiencies. In each one of the areas, we've made significant improvements in terms of platform, management, and user experience. Let me highlight a couple here. It's a busy slide. One of the challenges Tisa and I had was how do we get everything we had in 4.5, so I have about 60 seconds to cover everything. What I'm going to do is talk about three things. The first one is the kiosk mode you see upper left. It's a great solution for public endpoint or one that's used by multiple users. An endpoint set up with kiosk mode automatically logs into the virtual desktops without any need for user credentials. Once you set that up, user can simply walk up, in this case, let's say a doctor or a nurse, simply walks up to that endpoint and start using it and authenticate directly to applications as needed. So it truly simplifies access for average users. The USB devices are connected automatically, again without any user intervention, and Windows error messages, as you know, that could be pretty complicated for average users. They can be kept from appearing on the endpoint device. Right? The second thing I would like to highlight is the location-based printing. This allows you to automatically map virtual desktops to a printer that's closest to the endpoint device. So think of a doctor moving from room to room visiting patients while accessing their same virtual desktop in the data center through different client devices, thin client you may have throughout the hospital. With this feature, every time they print a document, that print job is sent to the closest printer, if that happened to be on that floor or next to that patient room, that's what they will be selected. Nice thing is, doctor doesn't have to do anything special to enable the automatic mapping, because all the mapping is defined by you, the IT folks, beforehand. Not only helps doctors and other users simplify the printing process, it also helps with the regulations. That way the printouts are not left and the printer is far away, and therefore any issues with compliance. And finally, the third thing I would highlight here is the single sign-on. That allows, again, let's use doctor or any other clinicians, walking up to the endpoint, tapping up their card or entering their password, whichever authentication method that you happen to have. Biometrics is supported, so is smart card and proxy cards. Once they tap into that device, it logs them into the endpoint device, moves it to the connection broker so that they have the right access to the right desktop, and logs them into the desktop as well as applications. So we partner with several of the providers in this arena and have many of the hospitals already using that in their solution. So those were the three key highlights I wanted to give. More than happy to address any questions about the product at the end so that we can get to the panelists as soon as we can. Next, I want to highlight how with View 4.5, as Tisa mentioned earlier, we've modernized the desktop by decoupling hardware from operating system to applications and data, therefore allowing you better manageability and better efficiency in terms of the desktop usage. Next, as you saw in the general session today, we will integrate SaaS and cloud-based applications with user personality across the diverse infrastructure. We'll build on top of that to include Zimbra-based collaboration and user workspace. To enable that, VMware formed a new business unit called End User Computing Business Unit. That's going to include the desktop, ThinApp, Workstation, and Fusion, as well as Zimbra products into this business units. You're going to hear a lot more about it in the coming days, particularly in the super session on Thursday. Okay? I think that covers all that we wanted to do and get to the panel session.
Oh, we get to the good part of the presentation. So again, welcome our panelists today. What I think would be interesting if we just start maybe with you, Josh, and go down the line, have you guys introduce yourselves, talk about some roles and responsibility and what you're using today in your current environment.
Hello. Hi, everyone. So my name is Joshua Spencer. I'm the team lead for the desktop development group at the University of Toledo Medical Center. Our university consists of a 22,000 student traditional university and a 300-bed teaching hospital that merged about 4 years ago. So my background is from the clinical side, but we do use VMware products, View, ThinApp, and server products on both sides of the house. So in our clinical environment today, we have about 400 desktops that we've got in production. We've got somewhere around 40 applications virtualized that are running throughout the entire environment. I'd say we're probably about 85% virtualized on clinical applications, and we're certainly shooting for 100% over time so that we can really get a true layered implementation. So that's pretty much where we're at today.
Hi, I'm Mark West. I'm a technology architect with Spectrum Health based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we are in the process of implementing or building a proof of concept with VMware View and ThinApp. And our focus has been the clinical user experience and enabling that best possible and most efficient experience for the end user and getting rid of the fragmented experience that they've had to date. We're a large Cerner implementation as well as recently an Epic implementation for our medical group, as well as Horizons and other products in the radiology space. So part of our challenge has been to integrate single sign-on and location awareness and provide, again, that best possible user experience.
My name is Joseph Wolfgram. I'm the IT director at Overlake Hospital in Bellevue, Washington. We have spent the last year and a half refreshing our entire infrastructure and rolling out a major upgrade to our EMR. We're a Meditech shop, so we went from Meditech Magic to Client Server 6.0, and that rolled out just August 1st. In terms of our View implementation, we call ours Overview for Overlake View. And we did that, a little bit of marketing like that, so that we could help the end user distinguish between a plain old PC and where they can use their Overview login. Several advantages to using this technology in a healthcare environment that were compelling enough to, move us forward and veer away from a traditional desktop replacement strategy we had planned, put in a VDI architecture, and today we do all of our training labs exclusively on thin clients, about 75 seats, and we've got a little over 100 users active on Overview every day. In March, when we go to clinical or electronic nursing documentation, we're going to have another 800 seats go live overnight. So that's going to be an exciting time.
Excellent. So each of you had some really interesting aspects to your deployment, and I think something that's probably really top of mind to a lot of the folks here in the audience is, how did you deal with the ISV support for delivering an application through a virtualized environment? Is there anything that anyone, feel free to jump in if you want to share kind of your experience around that area?
I'll say a quick word. From the beginning of the project, we knew it was going to be vital to have somebody who had been there, done this before, in a healthcare environment side by side with us. We selected a local ISV, a company by the name of Ivoxy, and they were really probably the only people local to us at the time that had put VMware View in production. So about 10 to 15% of our overall project budget was reserved and dedicated for that consulting support. And let me tell you, it was worth every penny.
Excellent. Would anybody else like to comment on?
Well, I guess one of the things that a lot of people ask about support and how you when you touch an application, when you reverse engineer or repackage somebody's application, what are the vendors going to think? And honestly, this is a challenge that my group, desktop engineers doing application repackaging, has faced for several years. Whether you're packaging an MSI, whether you're automating with a WISE executable, it doesn't really matter. We're primarily a McKesson shop, and their support says if you didn't do a sneakernet install with a CD on that machine, technically that's not our installation. And so you run into some support issues. But we've been repackaging forever, and ThinApp is really no exception to that. So what we found that is, as long as we can duplicate a problem on a clean machine with a clean installation, the vendor is always willing to work with us and take support. And we've never had any issue with everybody's aware of the way that we handle our applications. Haven't been any problems with it.
Excellent.
Yeah, we were very cognizant of the fact that for our Tier 1 clinical applications that we need the vendor to stand behind us. And we recently engaged with Epic on a ThinApping effort, and I believe we were one of the first customers to successfully ThinApp the Epic Hyperspace application. So we're in testing right now and getting ready to deploy that to production. We're expecting about 2,000 concurrent users, and that's in a Citrix environment today, and we plan to leapfrog that into VDI as we deploy VDI. We're also engaging with Cerner, and Cerner has a packaged offering around both ThinApp as well, on Citrix on the local desktop as well as on VDI. So we're working with them today to go through that packaging best practices and make sure that we're fully supported, and as well as building that location awareness piece, which is really crucial to our overall solution.
Excellent. So Mark, when you said that Cerner has a package for VDI, you meant View?
Yes, for View.
Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. So Mark, you mentioned that you're right now in the beginning phases of your journey, and you did a lot of pre-work to get you to that point. Can you comment on some of the exercises that you went through before you ever deployed anything, or before you started to ThinApp?
For View, for ThinApp?
Or? For either or. Before you even started putting anything into production, sure. Talk about some of the work that you did beforehand.
Well, and just to clarify, we're not in production on View today. We are still in proof of concept. Okay. And we've spent, over the last year, we've spent a lot of time just thinking about what does the solution look like, what can the solution do for us, and what problems can it solve. So we've talked to a lot of customers and a lot of other units within IT as far as the application teams to understand what their challenges are, what their customers' challenges are. So we spent a lot of time just modeling what does the workflow look like, because to us, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is improve the clinician's workflow. The other benefits that View and ThinApp bring are great as far as management and cost savings, but fundamentally how we're going to be successful and how we're going to sell the solution to our customers is having the best experience. So we spent a lot of time just understanding what are their challenges with a given sets of applications and given workflows differing between, say the emergency room and an ICU, and in our medical group practices, because their workflows are very, very different. So we've tried to design a singular workflow, and how can we combine these different technologies together between View. We're also in the process of implementing Centillion as well right now for single sign-on and CCOW integration. We're looking at proximity authentication or RFID authentication as well, so that's very important. So we spent, again, just a lot of time putting all these pieces together and making sure we can actually deliver that experience. And one of the things that we've been waiting for is some of the functionality in View 4.5 are very important to us and solve a lot of challenges. And one of our biggest challenges today is performance in our PACS environment, especially remotely. We have some Citrix deployments, and they've been a challenge for a long time. So the functionality that PC over IP is bringing, as well as some of the other things that have been highlighted, are very, very important.
Excellent. And Joseph, you have a rather aggressive schedule to roll out your desktops. Did you go through a similar exercise?
We did. We actually spent about twice as long in proof of concept as we initially planned. But again, that was because we were kind of baking all these ingredients together. The tap in, tap out access. We wanted the physician's desktop to follow them. in a way that was much better than, say, a roaming profile. Every second they spend to log in and log out, I mean, physicians are so pressed for time that, if you multiply that by how many visits a day, if they're waiting 20 seconds for a login, that's about 15 seconds too long. So we really worked on optimizing the code to be very quick connect and disconnect. I think that, I can say with confidence at this point, the technology's ready for prime time. And in healthcare, we're a pretty cautious breed. We've got patients' lives that we're always are on the other end of our technology. And we're able to architect, I think, a very robust, high availability architecture that is, instilled a lot of confidence in not only the IS staff, but in the executive leadership as well. So we're pretty proud of that.
Excellent. And then, Joshua, I know you had a rather interesting story how you got started in your journey. Wasn't it a single application that was causing you a lot of problems that you were looking for a solution for?
Absolutely. When we started looking at application virtualization, the director I had at the time said, this is not, the technology is too new, it's too out there, we're not going to do it. MSIs. And so eventually we worked to the point where we could do a pilot, and pilot looked really well. And we managed to get enough seats. We were able to purchase 1,000 seats of ThinApp, and the idea was that we were going to go live with one application, our critical patient care application called MySys Vision. It's since been bought out. It's now an Allscripts Vision. So we spent about 2 weeks really engineering the ThinApp, thoroughly testing it, working all the bugs out, getting it working with our clinical informatics folks. We rolled it out, put it on a central DFS share, and streamed it to about 700 end users. It worked really good. Everybody's kind of holding their breath, and for a week it just looked really well. Well, it turns out that there was a bug in the version of the application that we had rolled out, and the analysts worked with the vendor. They said, well, it's a pretty easy fix. Here's the patch. Here's an executable. Just replace this executable on your desktops. So in the traditional environment, we would have written a script. We just deploy the script with, in our case, Microsoft SCCM. And, the script goes out, disables the application, shuts it off, replaces the executable, lets people connect back in during a scheduled outage and all this sort of thing. What we ended up doing, and we weren't really familiar with the process that was available to us at the time, but a little bit of research turned out that we could take the ThinApp offline, edit the package, edit the bits, put the replacement executable in it, recompile it, and do an in-place upgrade on the server. So we literally just put a .1 executable file in the same directory as our standard executable file. And we did that during, it was off hours, but not without use. And basically we updated everybody, and come Monday morning, nobody was aware that we had done anything. We had a 0% failure rate, which I think was the first time we ever touched 700 systems without anybody calling and complaining. And that was really a showcase for the power of ThinApp, and we moved into an enterprise license from there.
That's great. Well done. Mark, you brought up an interesting point where you said, you're still in a proof of concept, but you're starting with your existing environment. You're going to leverage the investment you've already made in Citrix and start from that point. Do you want to comment further on that?
Sure. I think it's a significant advantage to obviously use and leverage the environment that you have, and we're looking at it as a stepping stone. So our first step has been to take our Citrix environment that's in place for Cerner, which is around 4,500 concurrent users. It's fairly significant, and it's a mature environment. So we're working on ThinApping that in Citrix and continuing to deploy that in the traditional model down to a fat client PC and thin client desktops as well. As we move that environment over to ThinApp and start to realize those immediate benefits, things like you mentioned, the upgrade process, even the downgrade process when necessary is significant advantages. So we can immediately start to realize some advantages there by just going the ThinApp route. And fortunately, Cerner is supporting deploying ThinApp on Citrix within a view session. So the location awareness functionality will work, which is very, very crucial for both Cerner and Epic, obviously. So we're looking at it as a stepping stone, and as we start to deploy View into the organization and reach critical mass, we can start backing down that Citrix environment and essentially make the flip at some point where we stop deploying through Citrix into View and start deploying that ThinApp package directly down into the View client. So it gives us a good transition strategy to leverage that existing investment in those licenses for Citrix, but obviously the maintenance costs are significant, and we can begin to realize those savings once we reach that critical mass.
Good point. So, Joseph, have you gotten any feedback yet from the 100 desktops that you have in production from your end users? Because we know how important that is to satisfy this group within the healthcare organization.
Yeah, in the areas we have View deployed now, I guess no feedback was the best feedback. We did several hundred hours of training for our new EMR, all on View and Thin clients, and nobody noticed that it was anything other than a regular PC session. So that was considered that successful. We did not have an investment in Citrix, and I think we were pretty lucky that we didn't have an investment in Citrix at Overlake, because I know a lot of healthcare institutions do have to deal with that issue. But one surprise benefit we were able to leverage was we could keep some fairly old PCs out there and get another year and a half of life out of them, because while they didn't meet the minimum specs for our EMR software, they met the minimum specs for the View client. So, it was like an instant turbocharge upgrade for that old hardware, and that's been very positive.
Great point. So now I just wanted to shift gears a little bit, and we've been hearing all this really great positive feedback. So I'd like you to be really candid and let us know if there's things that we can do better, or there's things that didn't go as well as you had hoped. Do you have any feedback around there? So, Mark, you look like you're ready to go.
I'm not shy. Some of the functionality that we were hoping would be delivered in View 4.5 is a clientless broker for tunneling PC over IP for our remote users. We have a significant population of users that come in remotely and use non-owned and managed assets. So for us to have to deploy a SSL VPN client or any other type of traditional VPN client down and manage that piece of software along with the View client through the View security server has been a challenge. So one of the things we've been talking about with VMware for quite some time is that piece of functionality and working with Teradici to deploy that. So that has not been delivered to date, so we're still talking through that, but that is a very important piece of functionality for us to take that support burden off of IT and make, again, that user experience as seamless as possible. One of the promises that we're trying to deliver on is that identical experience no matter where your location is, what device you're coming in from, and the ability to, again, roam that session from your private practice office to the hospital location to your home. And the more simple we can make that process for them, the more successful we're going to be.
Good point.
I think we got a couple of surprises in our implementation around just how robust the infrastructure needs to be to put virtual desktops out there in any scale, and it proved to be a little harder than I first imagined to get the business case to pencil out. It certainly does, but you have to really factor in things that some CFOs are likely to discount as soft dollars. But there are huge savings in staff resources necessary to be out in the field supporting these desktops. We were able to, shift, restructure the department around. It really is a paradigm shift here, going from a plain old PC model out there that you're supporting to a virtual client and the Thin client. And so we were able to move some of our desktop support positions into VMware View administration positions, which is good for them, good for us. And, the savings are there, but it was a little more difficult to pencil out because you have to really engineer the disk storage with enough IOPS, and, there were some surprises there, but nothing that couldn't be overcome.
That's good feedback. Thank you. How about you, Josh? Anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I guess I'd kind of like to piggyback on that a little bit. That the requirements definitely can catch you off a bit. You do a proof of concept, and then when you start to get things out into the wild, you see that they don't always use them the way that you expected. Profiles, can run out of control and eat up disk space. Lots of little things. I guess one of the things that one of our challenges was that we had about 600 PCs, physical PCs, in the hospital when we started the project. The HED project called for 300 new endpoint devices, bedside, nursing units, and on mobile carts, and no additional staff, of course, to support that. And so you're looking at 50% growth, and the whole view concept seemed like the way to go. And it has proven to be very good. We've moved a lot of the administration to the center and realized a lot of benefits from this. But one of the things that sort of caught us off guard was now we've still got those 600 traditional PCs to maintain while we're training and retooling the client services staff to support this new 300 systems this way. And so there's a little bit of growing pains that come along with that. So I think it's definitely worth spending the time to do the training up front. You're training the EMR staff, right, on using the new applications and things. You have to train your in-house staff too, the IT staff, on how to support a virtual machine, how to troubleshoot a thin client versus the back-end VM, that sort of thing, before you start deploying.
That's good. So in your organizations, is it still the desktop administrator that's looking after the virtual desktop machines? I know I get that question a lot, like do roles and responsibilities change when you move to a virtual desktop environment? I know you mentioned that you, Joseph, were able to train people and give them a new skill, but did anything else change within your organization about how you manage desktops? I know it touches both server as well as the endpoint.
It does. The lines are further grayed between, server back-end administration, virtualization, and what's happening on the desktop. We decided, and there may be some more changes as we learn too, but for right now, our desktop administration staff is with the same staff that do our data center and server virtualization. We think that, building in backup and that skill set with each other there, it's kind of running horizontally across the theme of virtualization rather than desktop back-end systems. So it definitely is changing things. I don't know that we've got it all figured out yet, exactly how an organization needs to morph to best support the virtual desktops, but I can tell you that it does need to change.
That's a good point.
I would agree. We're looking, towards certainly a shift in responsibilities and roles. But, I think that aside, one of the benefits that we're looking forward to is just the quality of service that we can deliver to the end user, because the time to resolve issues, be it a client issue, whether it's a thin client, a zero client, or a repurposed PC, it either works or it doesn't, and there's not a lot of troubleshooting involved there. And so we can think about in our remote locations, getting those devices replaced and repaired much, much faster, not having to deploy a technician to sit and troubleshoot as well as the travel time and the delay time in there. We can, stockpile an additional devices at these sites and train a user to plug and unplug them. And we concentrate our brain power in the data center, if you will, or back in the IT shop. And, they're sitting there working the queue and can resolve problems much, much faster. And, with things like ThinApp, there's not a lot of troubleshooting involved. Once the package works, it's probably going to work, and there's very few things. So we can quickly redeploy a virtual desktop if it has a problem. And because of the persona management and the other things that you mentioned, the user is right back up and running, with that same experience. And we just almost eliminate a lot of that troubleshooting as well. Or we can take it offline, get the user back up and running, and then deal with it after the fact.
Good. So it sounds like all of you were existing server virtualization customers before you went into desktop or application virtualization. So I guess maybe the last question I wanted to ask before we open it up to questions from the audience is that what are your plans moving forward? It seems like you're each at different levels of the journey, if you will, and where do you see this going moving forward? Are you buying into the concept of the private cloud? Are you planning on federating with a public cloud or getting some applications delivered that way? Just if you can comment around that, would be interesting, I think, to the audience.
Sure. So at this point, we're planning for what we're looking at is about a 5% growth per month over the course of the next year. That's both clinical and academic. Right now, I guess we're targeting what we call the low-hanging fruit, things that are shared desktops, things that are training labs, classrooms. We have a lot of that. And so those types of areas are very easy to get in, discover the needs, and put thin client replacements. So as we do workstation refresh, which again typically happens at about 5% per month, we're replacing things with thin clients as we go through. What I'd really like to get to is sort of the next phase of this on the clinical side is what these gentlemen are talking about. That's getting the individual desktops to follow people. Right now, all of our 300 HED VMs are all generic sign-on. We do a little bit of custom authentication and things to make sure that we're authenticating the end user, but they're really all logged in all the time under a generic account. We want to kind of get away from that, get to the point where we can really have a persona that follows our end user. So that is definitely a big phase 2, and ultimately the goal is within a couple of years to have every clinician, every clinical support individual to have their own virtual machine, or at least their own persona, however we can get there.
Excellent.
We've been a long-standing server virtualization customer with VMware, and we have a plan in place to get to around 86% of our Windows workloads, and we don't have a lot of Linux, but we do have some. Get those virtualized over the next couple of years, and really the only challenge that we're facing there is just enough time to do it, keeping up with the production demand, because our organization is growing leaps and bounds. So we have a pretty good solid plan in place for getting to where we need to be from a server virtualization standpoint, and we've really run into fairly little resistance on that front. One of the things I want to mention too on the view side of things and VDI side is I mentioned we're going through this growth right now in acquiring and partnering with community hospitals in the region, as well as building out our medical group. So one of the things we're looking at, a tremendous advantage with View, is to be able to quickly deploy our standard desktop service, if you will, to these partner hospitals or acquired hospitals immediately. Basically as soon as we can get a circuit up and running to them, or even before that via the internet, we can start providing our standard set of applications. So those teams that are involved in that merger process can begin immediately collaborating with our staff on the business side, and we can start deploying those clinical applications as the roadmap dictates very quickly, instead of the traditional model of going in and redoing their network, moving their servers to our data center, reimaging or replacing their desktops. That's all very time consuming and very expensive. So we see this as a very rapid way to engage those organizations and get them up and running and efficient immediately, while we change out the things on the back end over time as budgets allow, as resources allow.
Good point.
I guess the summary at Overlake is we have a virtual first policy in place in our data center. So as new systems come in, they have to have a real good reason not to be virtual. And I see us moving that way on the desktop as well. But in healthcare, I think one of the big challenges that maybe we didn't mention yet is bumping into software vendors that will not support their products virtualized, either a virtual application or running on a virtual desktop. And, I thought about that, and it just seems like a perfect excuse, well, there's an FDA certification or whatever. I think it's just extra work and investment for those companies, and maybe they're not quite comfortable with the technology yet. So we're sidestepping that as we can, meaning if the risk is low enough and the return is great enough, we will virtualize applications that are not supported by vendors. And we use NetApp storage on the back end, and with some fancy footwork, we can quickly take a virtual machine and make it physical again. So if we have to go into troubleshooting mode, we can, flip it to physical. We can replicate the same problem, work with tech support on that machine, get it resolved, flip it back to a virtual, and continue on with life. So I think a lot of it is about, working around those limitations rather than just being victim to them.
That's a good point. I think I'm going to ask someone to the audience to comment on that. I'd like to introduce Frank Neidam. He's our Director of Healthcare Solutions. And I work very closely with Frank and Mehul. And VMware as a company has done a lot of work to try to get those ISVs to support that model. So maybe you could just make a comment on the work that you and Promote's team's been doing over the last 3 years.
Sure. Am I on? Thank you. So we built a what's called a TAP validation lab. So free of charge for any clinical ISV that wants to come in and validate their application. They can come out to Palo Alto. We'll run the application through the validation lab, and they actually leave Palo Alto with a deployment guide for their application. So we're really happy with the response we've gotten so far. It's really about taking no off the table, right? If you want to virtualize one of your clinical applications, we want that to be a solid yes from the clinical ISV. And for none of us to really run into a problem at 3 o'clock in the morning saying, hey, what did you do? We want to take that off the table. So we've spent a lot of time and energy over the last 2 years on that.
That's great. Thanks, Frank. So with that, I think I'd like to open it up for questions. And there's a couple microphones. Frank, someone right behind you.
How you doing? I'm a vendor, and we are looking to deploy into these customer environments in a VM package, right? So I have a question for you guys as far as preferred method. Are you guys into appliances as far as deployment models, or just VMware ready VDIs? What do you prefer to receive from us? Take it from all of you.
Okay, I think that in the future, I look forward to the day where I do not have a data center of my own. I would like to have people who run data centers and do that for a business and can do it much better and have more dedicated staff than I can ever build locally. Unfortunately, I think we're a few years away from that, and our industry has to get comfortable with it. You know, kind of that feeling that if I keep all my cash in my mattress, it's safer there, and really probably a bank is a better place for it. I think that goes the same way with healthcare information, protected healthcare information. But since we're not there, I'm a little leery of the appliance-based solutions, you know, kind of parachute in a box and just have that service working locally. And I think that maybe in 12 months' time, I'll be more comfortable with that kind of approach. It's just that these ingredients are just now coming together to build a robust, scalable, reliable solution. So I'd rather see experience putting these systems in other healthcare organizations that are similar to mine and draw on that consulting to build our systems in-house at this point.
A lot of the customers come to us and they ask about cost savings for software, specifically Microsoft. And I know that the model has changed as far as how Microsoft is licensing the end units, you know, thin clients versus desktops and so on and so forth. But I'm just curious, have you realized any cost savings from Microsoft specifically on the desktop?
We're still investigating all the ups and downs. It's obviously Microsoft's licensing model is extremely complex and changes monthly. But one of the major benefits we're looking at is using some of the PC repurposing software that's hit the market from DV and IT, and Wise has a product out to eliminate the Microsoft stack off your physical device and allow you to extend that device and maybe eventually replace it with a thin client as the life cycle dictates. So we're centralizing those costs, but to some extent there's still a one-to-one relationship. So it really depends on where you're at. If you have an enterprise agreement, I don't have dollars and cents, or percentage differences, but we are certainly looking for a reduction in costs. And we've done comparisons between, physical desktop model and a virtual desktop model. And depending on what type of client device we choose, the costs do change. So one of our focuses is doing the analysis to understand and to drive down that per concurrent user cost as much as possible. Obviously, it makes it easier to sell it to the business, and we'll pay a lot of returns on the back end, but it does vary, and no environment is going to have a single type of device at the end user's desk. So you have to kind of take that hybrid approach and run the numbers yourself, I think, because it does vary greatly, I think, from environment to environment.
I would answer quickly that no, I haven't seen any Microsoft licensing savings by going to a virtual. And in fact, when they were still selling VECD licensing under the EA, it almost broke the project. That was a big surprise to us because you have to pay a monthly fee for that OS on each machine. We made the wrong assumption that we could take the operating system license that was on the desktop today and just use that once that machine's virtualized. learned the hard way that those are welded to the hardware, according to Microsoft. So I guess the only savings we did realize is when they stopped charging for VECD licensing, and we didn't have to pay that.
Good point.
My name is Andrew Violet. I work at a more of a managed care organization, and right now we have a implementation where we're looking at most of our users going mobile, probably half. So we're looking at probably 200 seats that are going to move out of the office and go out there with tablets and whatnot. So I'm wondering if you guys have had any experience with that, or how you've tried handling those mobile users.
We've done some of that. We have just a couple of labs that are used for external access. One of the architectural differences between a traditional view deployment and what we did was, rather than using the security servers out in your DMZ environment, we actually used a pair of Alteons. These are just appliances that do SSL acceleration and load balancing between the internal connection servers. So we set that up out of the gate. The intention was all this internal, thin clients and bedside, all that sort of thing, with the option to come in from the outside if need be. The outside stuff is what's really in demand, and people are wanting to make use of clinical software from anywhere, from remote locations, for training purposes, for all sorts of things. So.
I just want to say that the mobile access was a big driver for us, because we have about 1,000 physicians that are not owned by us, so they've got practices other places. So giving them the same experience to Overlake systems and resources from their office around the road was real important, and it's been very successful that way. We currently deploy to we can deploy to iPad and get your desktop from the iPad, and iPhone's not very useful. The screen's a little bit too small, but technically it can happen that way. We have a Mac users. Macs are very popular with the physicians, especially in their home office, so that also has worked very nicely.
I know this VMware forum is very much about going into the clouds, and I work at the health center at the University of Georgia, and the issue we have is HIPAA laws and trusting some other cloud provider to protect your data. I mean, you're dealing with health information, and you're dealing with laws that I can go to jail for should these things be broken, because we're in charge of security of health information. So I don't think I'm hearing from any of you guys that you're trusting into the cloud yet, but I just wonder, what questions are you going to be asking amongst yourself with your security people and dealing with vendors, external vendors, as far as how can we truly trust that this stuff is secure, considering the nature of the information that's sitting on all of our networks?
It's true. I mean, there's a lot of regulation around protected healthcare information, and when it's electronic, it makes it easier to distribute and easier to get out of control. But again, I would say that there probably some time needs to pass so that we've got some trust in these cloud vendors. Kind of market shakes out a little bit, and we see who's going to stick around. But other than that, I really see it as a much safer place to put my data than to think that I can build data centers with an anemic IT staff that hospitals have to work with that's going to be better than what dedicated professionals can build for us. So I think really it's a mind shift more than anything else, and a little bit of maturity that has to happen in that market.
Question for you. We've got a lot of nurses who use basically Flash-enabled training programs, and we want to use the VDI method, whether that's View or Zen Desktop or whatever. How has that worked for you to use Flash-enabled apps and high-end video over PCIP IP or whatever?
Early on in our proof of concept testing that we were doing, we initially started with RDP. We looked at the HPRGS software a year and a half ago, I guess. We put a stake in the ground as soon as we saw PC over IP that we would not deploy with any other protocol. And we've had great success because we have Flash-based websites, we use Flash-based training, we've done side-by-side comparisons, and played with controlling the amount of bandwidth that is given to those clients, which is a very, very important thing that you need to make sure you go through, because for all it does, PC over IP will tend to use as much as it can take. So there is some realistic limits that you have to put in place. But from a user experience perspective, whether it's flash training content, watching a video on Hulu, or watching a cardiology study or any kind of PACS image. We've been very impressed with the performance so far, and not just from a technical standpoint, but our PACS administrators, our PACS analysts that use this technology and work with the customers every day. They've seen significant improvements, and to the point where it's not even noticeable between a FAT client.
Okay, one more. Sir, did you have a question?
It's a perfect follow-on, actually. It's similar, related to rich content. So telehealth and teleconsultation is a key aspect for how we deliver care more and more. It ties to the mobility piece, of course. It ties to any of you who have a multi-site installation. How do you see two-way collaboration, multi-collaboration for voice and video playing in with USB peripherals and all the, particularly it's HD content, so we're talking 720p, maybe 1080, working between sites that are delivering a virtual desktop?
We've done some testing on that kind of rich media experience, and I'm aware that VMware is working very closely with Cisco and other partners to enable that within the PC over IP protocol for bidirectional video and audio as well, and the peripherals, as you mentioned, that come along with that. So I can't speak from production experience yet, but from what we've seen from a roadmap perspective, it is certainly delivering that very soon, and to get us to that point, because while we're not using it today necessarily, in a lot of cases we have dedicated video conferencing equipment, we certainly see that trend happening, and it will be important in the future.
Thanks. We've got time for maybe one more question, and then we probably need to wrap it up. So did you want to go? Oh, sorry. Was there someone back there on the line?
Hello, David Maldonado with Palo Alto Medical Foundation. We have a very large proximity and biometrics deployment, so I was wondering if you've tried any of that with thin clients and VDI, as well as any voice dictation, PowerScribe, Nuance, Dictaphone.
At Overlake, yes, to both of those, and we've been very successful with the dictation. PowerScribe is actually one of the products we use and support. Drag and Dictate is another one. With the PC over IP protocol and the thin clients, pretty much anything you can do with a plain old PC can be done over the thin client.
To add on to that real quick, one of the things that we're working with Teradici and VMware on is the PC over IP 0 clients using the readers that we're looking at today, our RFIDs, passive proximity card readers. Today they do not have native support to authenticate you to the View client and then pass that into your View session. But we've been successful, obviously, in doing any Windows-based client, so whether it's a Windows XP or 7 device or Windows Embedded, where we can load that software for the Centillion software, which is brokering that conversation, if you will. So we're hoping that gets delivered, because we do see a lot of benefits in going towards 0 clients across the board.
Thank you.
We're actually using those proximity card type access points on Linux thin clients as well, so it's coming along.
Okay, we're getting the hook, so we're going to have to wrap this up. I wanted to thank our panelists very much today. I think this was extremely helpful and informative. I'd also like to mention that there's another healthcare panel discussion at 2 o'clock today, hosted by Frank Neidem, so you can find that in your booklet. We'll stick around for a little bit if you have some more questions, and thank you very much for joining today.